living functions, organization, and cell theory. We're going to tie all three of these things together so that you guys have a really good idea of where we're going for the next couple of weeks and maybe even the next couple of months. The first thing we're going to talk about today is structure and function. You're going to have a good idea of what these words mean and how they apply to living stuff. Then we're going to talk about what living things do. And then we're going to talk about how we know if something qualifies as life or not. So here we go. Structure versus function. Real simply, structure is how something is put together, its parts, its pieces, how it's organized. And function is what something does, its job or how it processes stuff. Life has both of these things. There's a structure to life and there's a function to life. And often the way something is structured determines how it can function. We know these things, that cells make up tissues, that tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, and that organ systems make organisms. We can make a cool graphic that looks like this so that cells are the smallest and they lead all the way up to an organism. This is the structure of life, of living things, plants and animals. I think you understand this. The other day in class we talked about the function. We sorted all those little cards and we ended up labeling things as like waste removal or processes energy or can move. And we came down to 6 things that living things do. They reproduce. They can do that asexually or sexually. Either way, they produce offspring. Things can grow. Things can obtain and use energy. These are words like metabolism and respiration and photosynthesis. These are really important words here that we need to know, and they'll come up quite a bit in the future. We know that we can produce and release waste. And in the end, we can respond to our environment. We're going to call this stimulus and response. So something stimulates you, it causes you to do something, and then you do it. That's your response. So this is the function of life. These are the things that living things do. So this is your function. Levels of organization is your structure. How do we put them together? Well, we're going to put them together with cell theory, because cell theory is the idea of, yes, something is living. So we know that organisms do this. I didn't have to tell you this. You guys figured this out on your own, sorting those cards and figuring stuff out. You realized that, hey, organisms can do these things. But the important thing is that you realize that cells can also do these same things. And that's the trick. Can we figure out how cells do the same thing as organisms? One of the things we have to establish is, how do we determine if something is alive? We can't just determine it's alive by its structure. We have to determine it's alive by its structure and its function. So here's cell theory. We're going to pause the video here and sort some cards. Okay, so you sorted some cards. And though the work of all those scientists enabled us to come up with what we call cell theory. And it's this. It's that cells are the basic form of life. We knew that from levels of organization, but this is really important for biology and science in general. Next, we know that cells make up all living things. Not everything, just stuff that's living. We also know that cell can process energy. All right? Whether it's a plant or an animal cell, it can use energy. We know that cells come from other cells. This is the idea of reproduction. We know now with fancy microscopes that cells have DNA. That's a whole other discussion, but we'll get there. And then we lastly know that cells are made of the same basic chemicals. To me, that sounds like there's more to levels of organization than I told you, which is true. So here we go. Let's tie cell theory back to our idea of structure and function. So these parts of cell theory are structure. These parts of cell theory are function. So here's the tie-in. If a cell can do these things and an organism is made out of cells, then we have to assume that an organism can do these things too. So here's another way. Cell theory tells us what cells are and that cells are alive. Since cells are alive and cells make organisms, we have to assume that, organisms can do the same things as cells. Which we know is true because the processes that happen in a cell are the same processes that happen in an organism. Your job is to figure out how those life functions happen in an organism and in a cell, and then ultimately start to compare them. And that's where we're headed. Hope this helps you figure out what's going on.